Haley knows this very well. But hey, but first let me just say good morning, everybody that I didn't greet already. My name is Yvette Madison. I'm a professor of social work here at Pennsylvania Highlands Community College, and I welcome you to the Introduction to Social Work. That's what this course is. But today, actually this week, what we were doing in class is talking about diversity and empowerment. And so I asked one of the probably best speakers, I guess I could say, for in the area of diversity, ableism, the one that I know, to come and present to the students. And I just invited everyone here, come on in to join us, because I feel like that this is information that is just beneficial for everyone. Not so much to be like a preachy, this is what diversity is, but just taking this introspective type of look and exploring yourself, your thoughts, your ideas, you know, for you to begin to think about what you're thinking about when it comes down to how do I view folks who are different than I am. Okay, so I want to take a few minutes and introduce our speaker to you all. Our speaker, excuse me, is Rachel Allen. She is a certified music practitioner, sound healer, Reiki master, and experienced registered yoga teacher. Her experience includes 17 years of hospice as a music practitioner, serving patients in a variety of conditions, and she continues to work at Wimber Hospice even today. Rachel also has 8 years of experience providing trauma-sensitive yoga and facilitating expressive music to women who are incarcerated, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault in various community-based settings in the past and present partnerships with many organizations, including Victim Services, Tableland, Torrance State Hospital, and Cambria County Prison. She is involved nationally with the Breathe Network as a rostered healing artist, as a rostered healing arts practitioner, and regionally with the Unity Coalition of the Southern Alleghenies, a social justice organization dedicated to building peace in the community. Rachel has studied the intersection of yoga and social justice for over a decade. She is trained and certified as a dynamic, gentle yoga teacher and as an accessible yoga teacher and ambassador. Rachel is the author of the recently published chat book, Blessings Beyond Bypass, and has had work published in Northern Appalachia Review, Long Shot Books, and is part of the blog team for Christians practicing yoga. Rachel Allen facilitates yoga, healing music, and movement experiences in person and virtually at retreats, conferences, and offers trainings on resilience building, compassion fatigue, trauma, and mindfulness through the USA and internationally. So I present to you all my friend, Miss Rachel Allen.
Good morning, clapping. I heard what I had to say yet. I'm really glad to be here, and we're going to talk about beliefs. And one of the things that we can come to an awareness of is when we talk about difference, when we talk about change, is understanding or being able to understand our beliefs and get in there with them and sort of come to, you know, maybe have a discussion. Why is it so challenging to talk about differences? It seems like we're really elevator and talk about the weather, but it's really hard. You know, things show up for us when we talk about differences. We're going to talk about that. We're going to explore that a little bit. Okay. All right. So moving from reaction to right action, a lot of times when we're confronted with things that challenge us, how many of you have like really strong reactions to things? Yeah. So that's a normal thing. So we're looking at sort of unpacking, moving from a reaction to a right action, looking to find that pause in between the stimulus and the response. And so the beliefs, we have to talk about beliefs and think about our own beliefs about ourselves, you know, and think about like this person here, this really interesting cartoon looking person, say that, imagine that's you. And thinking about like your goals that are at the end of that road, and then all the things that show up in between you and your goals. Have any of you ever had challenges about like, oh, I want to do something, but I'm afraid that I don't have the right math skills? Or anybody ever felt like challenged by their own goals, right? So what shows up for you when you feel challenged by looking to achieve goals? What shows up? Yeah,
Doubt
doubt. Okay. What do you doubt?
myself a lot.
Okay. Yeah, where does that come from? Anybody else? Thank you. Anybody else? Did anybody relate to her experience of sharing doubt? Yeah.
Insecurity.
Insecurity, fear. How about fear? Woo, big one. Relatives. They're there. Why are they there? Right? Some of your friends, right? So it's sort of, we can gain an understanding about the things that beliefs that stand in between us and our goals at the personal level. Beliefs we have about ourselves and the world. And so beliefs, this is something that's really important to know. This sort of framework about beliefs comes from one of my teachers, Nikki Myers. Nikki is a former sex worker. She is in recovery. She's been in recovery for a significant amount of years. She's also a great grandmother now. And she's the founder of Yoga for 12-Step Recovery. And she's done a lot of work around unpacking beliefs. So a lot of, when we talk about beliefs, beliefs are inborn, they're acquired. They're acquired. Sometimes beliefs are imposed by the culture that we live in. Sometimes beliefs are institutional. We can see a lot of if you look at the history of our country and you look at who were given rights at the onset of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and who were not given rights, we can see that about beliefs being institutional. And so beliefs are something, if we're linking beliefs and we're linking neuroscience, beliefs are deeply embedded neural networks in our brain. So, you might not know where that doubt came from, but it might come from like what you've, something in your family, it could be really difficult to have an awareness of where a lot of things come from. And so again, when repeated, whether it's conscious or not, they become deep neurological grooves in our brain, and our reality becomes shaped and defined. Our thoughts, words, and actions, and how we show up in the world and how we interact with the world are shaped by that. And I keep calling on you because you raised your hand, but that doubt, I imagine that can cause suffering. It can cause suffering when you doubt yourself, right? And sometimes some of these beliefs can create suffering in our society if there are beliefs that we have that maybe harm another person. And so when they come with us wherever we go. And this is important. One of the things that's really important for all of you, that you're here because you want to gain a set of skills to be able to be in a profession and deliver that set of skills. Is that why everyone's here? In some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So you want to have an understanding, why is it important for me to examine my beliefs in the scope of my career, in the scope of practice of what I'm going to be doing? Why is it important to me? Really, I'm asking you questions that you don't need to answer right now, but I want you to keep asking yourself these questions as you move through life. They're not things that you find like the first answer to, and then, okay, one and done, check, move on, right? It's constantly changing. And so being able to have that awareness in your life and your profession, your chosen profession, that you're coming into your profession. And I'm guessing because of the nature of social work, criminal justice, that you're not going to be in an office in a cubicle somewhere. You're going to be interfacing with other human beings. So having that awareness is really important. Why is it difficult to bridge differences, and why is it important for me to examine my beliefs? That's something that to be asking the right questions, not questions like, why am I so stupid? That's the wrong question. Asking yourself the question, what is showing up for me here? So this is sort of this framework that we're going to explore today, these beliefs that drive our thoughts, words, and actions, and they come with us wherever we go, knowingly or unknowingly, projecting into the spaces and places we inhabit. And so thinking about the evolution of beliefs, so we're going to come, are you coming in here?
I believe so.
Okay, come on in. So thinking about the evolution of beliefs, thinking about your individual beliefs, Have any of you had any belief change as your life experience changed? Anybody? Can anybody speak to that?
Um, religious beliefs.
Okay. So would you call that a spiritual maturity? If I could, religious beliefs, anybody else? Yeah,
Yes.
This was less an example of myself and more an example of my dad. My dad, his beliefs of the world changed wildly over the last 10 years, for the better, in my opinion.
okay,
Mine also changed to some extent, but I would say I wasn't done forming my beliefs by the time I was at the age when I started having my current beliefs, in my opinion,
okay.
rather than just parroting what my parents did before me.
Right, which is, well, we inherit a lot of those. Thank you. Somebody from the Zoom, I think, Rena, did you have something to say?
Renew.
Renew, okay. Did you want to share something?
Yeah, no, it's just that I feel like it's something that we continually develop as we learn more about the things around us.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm experiencing that a lot.
So would you say that when you're learning from things around you, that you have to keep an open mind about that?
Yes.
Okay. So what does it mean to you to keep an open mind? What does that feel like?
Because everyone doesn't have the same beliefs. And as you mentioned before at the beginning of the lecture, that our belief is like the product of our environment in a sense. And then we are inherently get shaped into what we believe by the people around us, by what we learn. And we come in contact with many people in different walks of life, and we can't judge their beliefs on ours. Like where I grew up and how like Americans view certain things is different. Oh, sorry. So I feel like my beliefs continue to develop as I'm learning, and as I'm learning from other people and I'm learning about myself. I think that's where I'm trying to go with here.
Yes, thank you for that. So I heard you say a couple of things, that you're continue to be molded and shaped by listening to the experiences of people whose life is different than yours, not necessarily denying their experience, which happens a lot, but listening and recognizing that their experience is different than yours and allowing that to shape and mold you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
I have two kids, and I feel like ever since I had kids, it makes you kind of reevaluate your own beliefs because you're trying to teach the next generation of kids something new. Like when I was a kid, society and a lot of people's values were different than they are now. So it's like a constant balance of trying to make sure I'm giving them the tools that they need, but also trying to instill like the morals and values in them that I have from my childhood.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. So it sounds like you have examined your beliefs and you've sort of like seen what you want to take forward with you, and maybe what you want to leave behind. Anybody else? Okay. And so some of you have shared that you have this process where you've observed your values shifting and changing. What does that feel like to be in that process? What does that feel like?
Uncomfortable.
Right. Yes, it feels uncomfortable. And that's one of the things that we'll continue to talk about is resourcing ourselves for discomfort. A lot of times we resist change because it's uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. Confronting beliefs that perhaps need shifted is uncomfortable for many of us. And so that's not a reason to shut down. It's a reason to keep going forward. What about cultural beliefs? Are there any cultural beliefs that you've witnessed changing in your lifetime? Societal beliefs, cultural beliefs that you've witnessed changing in your lifetime? Buddy? So I was born in 1966. So I'm pretty old. And I have a 22-year-old daughter, Riley, and she has spina bifida. She's in a wheelchair. And prior to 1973, she would not have been able to receive an education in any public school. She would have had to been institutionalized. So thinking about the way that beliefs have changed about people with disabilities, thinking about, there's and then recognizing just because laws change, don't mean attitudes change. That's something that's really important for all of us to remember. Just because laws change, don't mean attitudes have changed. Sometimes the laws come first and the attitudes still trickle decades behind. And so just, having that awareness that the beliefs evolve, and sometimes, that most of the time that's not a bad thing. And here's just some examples, evolution of beliefs about women in America. Until 1978, a woman could be fired from her job if she got pregnant. Till 1978. That maybe seems like a long ago year to you, but for someone like me, I was born in 1966. This is like in my lifetime. Sexual harassment in the workplace, that's 1977. It wasn't recognized until then, and then it wasn't until 1980 that it was fully recognized by the EEOC. And in my work, I work with domestic violence and sexual assault. It wasn't until the late 70s, mid to late 70s, that we even had domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers. And that happened, in this time period, because of lots of reasons. So there was just a woman that wasn't allowed to run in the Boston Marathon in 1971. She's like in her 90s and she just ran it. She came in like really behind everyone, but she was not permitted to run in the Boston Marathon because she was a female. Get a credit card. That's crazy. Also, along with that was getting a mortgage or buying a house, a bank loan. A woman couldn't refuse to have sex with her husband. Compete as a boxer, and now we see Muhammad Ali's daughter is a boxer. Get a divorce with degree of ease. International Women's Day. The abortion thing is changing in many states across the country. Read Ms. Magazine. And here, I want you to look at this poster. This is from January. It says 29. It's supposed to say 19. Or no. Okay. This poster was for a Martin Luther King event in 2018 or 2019. And it says that it calls him an American hero and a leader. Okay. And I think most people in our country now would call him an American hero and a leader. But however, during the time of his activism, only 23% of white Americans supported the civil rights movement. He was viewed by white people largely as a dangerous, like radical. So look at that change, that he's lauded as an American hero, in 2018.
2019.
And here, this, look at the faces of the people. What do you see in that picture? Anger.
Hatred.
Hatred. Yeah. So that is our history, and that is what the reality of that was the reality of what many white people thought about the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King. And so one of the things that we're here to talk about is that there was a catchphrase, and I know Professor Madison, we've heard these phrases change throughout the years, and one of the catchphrases like maybe 10 years ago was cultural competency. And that was like, okay, I can go take a workshop on diversity and I can be called culturally competent and check the box, one and done. But it's best, the American Psychological Association has done a lot of work digging into beliefs, digging into the psychology of beliefs. And looking at this as a process rather than some sort of certification that you can say, hey, I have competency. But culture humility, and I love that centering of that, because there's three basic fundamentals, and it's centering it into our process. It's a process. It's not a check the box. It's a lifelong commitment to observing our own biases and assumptions that we make about other people, about our own lives. And the yogic tradition is called cultivating the witness. Having the desire to address imbalances of power. One of the things that when we talk about discomfort, many of us, especially if we're in the dominant culture, are used to having our comfort centered. And so being able to recognize, oh, that's part of imbalances of power, and willingness to change that. It's not enough just to observe it. What can we do to change that? What can we do to change that within the relationships we have, within the organizations that we're perhaps a part of? What can we do to shift and change that? Anybody have any comments about this? Have you heard this phrase before? Cultural humility? Is it a new one? What does it mean to you to have this frame of reference? What shows up for you?
Yes, like when you see the word or hear the word humility, to me it automatically kind of gives you that sense that there has to be recognition of that I'm not the only one, that I'm not the best, I'm not the greatest, but there has to be room for everyone to like to shine, so to speak. And just recognizing that the discomfort in change leads to the comfort in that shift of the power, as you spoke about. So when we think about humility, like just exhaling,
Right.
and existing in your own peace instead of trying to puff up and peacock all over the place, so to speak.
Right, peacock, I like that. So, and I think humility, like to unpack, we're not talking about humiliation. That's I think sometimes people will see the word humility and associate it. I associate it more with humbleness, which was what you were saying. And that humbleness is a quality we don't see mirrored in our culture. We really, I think Mr. Rogers, and God bless him, but we don't see it mirrored. We see people like self-proclaimed experts constantly like telling us what they are so good at. And humbleness is just when I meet someone who's humble, I feel like I can trust them. I feel like there's an authenticity there. If someone is deeply listening and they're willing to learn, it's a quality that would, and that doesn't mean when we cultivate something like humbleness, we're not able to have self-honoring boundaries either. So getting sort of unpacking some of these things and getting really clear. This is not so much academic as it is interpersonal and intrapersonal. And mindfulness, the American Psychological Association talks about mindfulness being a way to sort of approach cultural humility. And what does the word mindfulness mean to anyone here? I mean, it's being used to sell soap and all sorts of things, but what does that word mean to anyone here? That word mindfulness, you hear it a lot. Yeah.
Being aware.
Being aware. Yeah, being aware. I will add to that, being aware without judgment. My own definition of mindfulness is coming into the present moment with a sense of curiosity and kindness. How many of you, when you come into the present moment and notice something, feel things like shame and guilt and fear wash all over you and self-judgment? Anybody? Okay, that's not mindfulness. So, that's not mindfulness. Mindfulness is being able, mindfulness is the difference between, I might say, oh, I'm such a jerk, and saying, oh, wow, I'm really behaving unskillfully. Do you hear the difference between that? So that's the difference. Like I'm being a jerk is not mindful, but I am behaving unskillfully is mindful. I'm recognizing that I'm behaving unskillfully. And it gives me a space to move from, rather than I'm such a jerk, it's like stuck boots in wet cement, right? So when we cultivate an awareness that behind our beliefs, whether those beliefs are personal, imposed, cultural, institutional, or systems of discrimination and segregation. And one of the things I was talking to Professor Madison about this, one of the reasons I think it's really difficult to confront beliefs that come from the systems of discrimination agenda is because it's so painful. It's because it's painful. And it can be painful for different reasons based on your positionality in society. And it can shut us down. And what we want to do is to not let that shut us down. We want to lean into some of that discomfort with us from a place of feeling grounded and connected, recognizing that when we're in spaces with other people, that all of these belief things are coming with us, and behind these beliefs are these systems. And we either will perpetuate these systems or we'll help undo them. It depends on how we respond. And this is really important to remember. We're not bad people when things arrive from beliefs that aren't maybe examined, confronted, unpacked. It's going to happen to all of us all the time. It's a result of being people who live in a particular time with a particular set of circumstances. So it's what we do with what we're presented with unexamined beliefs. And especially if we're in a position to be in dominant culture, that can lead to further entrenchment of those beliefs or to change those beliefs. And when we change beliefs, and there's a whole emerging science called epigenetics, which is absolutely fascinating. When we change beliefs, we're actually creating new neural networks, and it's really, really, really difficult. It's like if you're on a backcountry road and there's like the road is muddy, your tires are going to create a rut in the road. And if you go to drive over that road when the mud is dried, your tires are going to go back into that rut. And one of the things that we can recognize is that the neural networks that we were born with will always be with us, but we can create new neural networks and recognize, oh, that's that. I often will say, oh, that's a family of origin belief that keeps showing up, and being able to recognize that and then like go into that new neural network. And it's a process and a practice. Anybody have a comment or question about this approach to cultural humility? Zoom people? Yes.
I just want to add, one of the things we look at moving from cultural competency to humility, it really does focus on not just an awareness of the changes around us, but that we do not know everything.
Right.
People say, oh, I recognize that, but do they really understand? So as I always tell my students, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can always learn. So that humility is, I need to learn about this. Okay? And that to me is really the cusp of this humility.
Right. And recognize one of the things like I operate because of what I do from everything happening from a nervous system perspective, central nervous system. And one of the things that it's important for us to know when our nervous systems are activated, and we're going to talk about that, we're not able to grow and learn. It's not possible. So we have to find ways to move beyond that activation to be in that space. Is it Dr. Clark?
That's what they call me.
Okay. Said of learning and growing. So we have to be, and if your nervous system is activated and if we're defensive and we shut down and shame and denial, we're not capable of learning and growing. So that understanding of our own nervous systems is I think a really important part of the evolution of beliefs. And so I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story of something I experienced. And I want you to listen to the story, not about what you think about the story or what I should have done or what I did or didn't do, but listen to the story. Think about what you felt like when you heard the story, and we'll talk about it. And so in 2016, I was invited to speak and be one of the main presenters with Erica Brosick from Victim Services at the National Sexual Assault Conference in Washington, D.C. And it was a week-long conference, and we were one of the main presenters, and we got to present on the first day of this 5-day conference, which was great. I got to get my nervousness over with. We presented to about 300 people on our trauma-sensitive yoga program, and the rest of the week got to go to all of the different workshops. And it was one of those conferences. There were people from all over the country, a lot of diverse gender identities, a lot of people from different cultures. And it was really, for me, I felt so excited about being able to be in an environment like that and learn. And so the last workshop of the whole week, it was Friday, I walk into the workshop and I go in and sit down. I note that behind me there are people with translation services, headsets, and I noted that, and I went and sat down. And as the workshop began, I realized that the speaker, the presenter, was speaking in Spanish. And my response, I became super activated. What I wanted to do was get up and run out of that room. I was like, I resisted being the person that had to put the headset on. And I sat and my heart was pounding. I wanted to run out of the room. My palms were sweaty. And then I was like, oh, I put the headset on and got the translation. And so I sat there for a few minutes with all sorts of things like just flowing through my body. Shame, 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 shame. And I continued to sit through the workshop. So reflect back to me, what happened? What did I just share with you? What happened in that workshop? What happened in that workshop? Yeah.
Whenever you were exposed to something that you weren't knowledgeable on, it made you nervous.
Uh-huh. Yep, thanks.
It's definitely like a shock instant where you're like, oh, I just don't really know what to do, right?
And why would that be?
I'm assuming you aren't fluent in Spanish,
Okay,
so you're just very confused by what was going on.
right, right. Anybody else?
Maybe you didn't like come to like you didn't start out with an open mind.
Right.
You're not willing to learn.
Right.
Even if you couldn't understand them.
Right.
I'm wondering if you felt like I don't need that. I'm an important person and I don't need that and I can figure this out as we move forward.
Yeah, it's taken me, I've sat with that experience that happened in 2016. I continue to go back and be curious about that experience. One of the things that showed up for me is even though I'm someone wholeheartedly committed to doing this work, I expected my comfort to be centered as a white English speaking person. And so that was to me, I was like, okay, wow. Like I still have so much work to do. I still have so much work to do. And I continue to allow that experience instead of shutting me down to allow me to like, okay, there's an edge of growth that I need. There's a lot of growth that I still require. My comfort does not need centered. That's something my culture has taught me, but it's not true. That does not, English doesn't need to be centered everywhere, right? So that's something that I still, that experience, when we have experiences like this, if I would have ran out of the room, and I almost did, what would I have learned? What would I have learned and sat with and shame was the first thing that showed up for me, but I allowed myself to be curious after that. So I'm like, there's a space here, there's a like enormous space where I need to grow. And this experience is showing me that. So I'm grateful for the experience where I experienced such extreme discomfort because it's allowing me to grow. And so a lot of times things show up in our lives, exchanges, even just regular conversation shows up in our lives and we don't recognize that sometimes the context of that conversation can be problematic. So I'm just going to read some of these phrases to you. And this comes from, I work with a think tank and you'll get the link to their website on the PowerPoint. I work for a think tank called Harris Connections. And Harris Connections does a lot of DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Harris Connections is founded by my dear friend, Dr. Gabriel Washington, and his sister, Dr. Sarah Chukari. And Dr. Washington is a 7th generation Black farmer in Bedford. And his cousin, Dr. Sarah Chupcree, is a linguistics professor at Columbia University. And we're currently working with Johnson & Johnson, the international company. So we're working with people from different countries from all over the world. And we're having these types of conversations with them about communicating in the workplace. And these are just some phrases that show up. And you know, you're so articulate. Where are you from? Can I just call you John? How are you, sweetie? Do you need a hand? Where's your smile today? Kudos to you that you're still working. Could you please lower your voice? So these might be things that you've heard before. You might have said them. They might not be familiar to you. And they might be like, well, why do you have these words, these phrases up here? They seem completely fine. But if you put this in the context, and I'm just curious, has anyone heard any of these phrases, or and can you share a context where you heard it that it might be problematic? Yes.
I've heard very problematic.
Okay. And how do you interpret that?
Like, sometimes people are just curious, but other times they're just trying to figure out how to treat you based on your.
Right. Yeah. So do you feel that sometimes people will want to classify? And yeah. Do you feel sometimes when people ask you that, do you feel like it comes from a place of belonging? Maybe. Yeah. I've heard some of my friends that are not originally from the United States will have that asked to them 3 or 4 times in a row, especially if they have an accent. And they'll say, well, I live in Johnstown. Where are you from? Evansburg. Where are you from? Evansburg. But where are you really from? Evansburg. You know, so there's that phrase can be a very innocuous. It can be just like, hey, where are you from? What, you know, where, or it could be like, no, where are you from? You know, trying to figure that out. And I don't, you know, what about, can I just call you John? Where might that show up?
You can't pronounce somebody's name.
Right.
You want to give them a nickname.
Right.
I can say that from experience.
Okay, who's speaking?
Renee.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't feel like it's intentional, and I don't know, that's just personal feeling. Like I just think like they're trying, and it's really much up to you, because a lot of, I don't want to say all of us, look, but for a foreigner, we tend to pick an English name. I didn't. I stuck with my like native name.
Okay.
But I know and do know people that do choose an American name because it's just easier.
Right. Yeah, and I heard you say the word trying. So when you recognize someone's trying, does that feel differently than someone that's just dismissive?
Yes, and I guess it could be put in a sense where like how much am I going to be involved with this person? I guess if it's just like a passing person, you just like pick and choose your battle, and you're like, okay, yeah, you can call me Renee, and then at the end of the day, I guess. But if you're like a coworker, I guess that would be different.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that, Renu. Thank you. I know my daughter Riley, who I mentioned is in a wheelchair, she goes to Carlow University in Pittsburgh, and she'll be going to class, you know, minding her business, and there's a road that sort of goes through the campus, and she's had people stop and yell out the window to her like, way to go, girl, like little girl in the wheelchair, you know, and she's just like, oh my gosh, you know, going to class, you know. So it's you know, sometimes our intent may not be malicious, but it can be perceived as patronizing, or it can be perceived as something other than what our intent was. So these are just things to keep in mind. And when we talk about our nervous system, and this is what we were talking about when we're talking about being confronted with changing beliefs or being in situations where our beliefs are confronted. So this is what a healthy nervous system looks like. It's like sort of like a flow, like a wave. a flow, a wave. So you get like an activation, something happens, and then you come back to balance. This is a healthy nervous system. It's within this parameter here that has to do with like hormones and heart rate and body temperature. And this is what happens when this thing that we call the window of tolerance. And we've probably all had a lot of experience out of the window of tolerance in the past several years. But when there's an excessive activation in our nervous system, we're going to be outside, like way up. And some of us have maybe a hypoarousal, like a freeze response and emotionally flat. Maybe sleeping all the time is your response to like extreme stress. So just seeing that, like, oh gosh, yeah, there's situations that show up that bring us outside that window of tolerance. Does this make sense to people? Can you relate to any of these being on either end of the window of tolerance? Can you recognize that you tend to have a habitual one? How many of you tend to like be more hypo, where you're like, oh, sleep. Okay. How many of you get like super activated where you're like, oh my God, I just got to run out the door. Yeah. So we all have all of these, but knowing what your habitual patterns are really helpful, But we're, when we're outside that wall of that window of tolerance, we need to find tools and supports to bring us back into the window of tolerance, and recognizing when we're outside that. And here you can see when we're in the window of tolerance, this is that space where Dr. Clark said we can learn. When we're in the window of tolerance, grounded, flexible, open, curious, present, able to emotionally self-regulate. So that's, when we talk about beliefs, we're talking about things that are embedded in us, that we experience in our bodies, that we experience as a physiological experience as well as a mental and emotional. It's all connected. And so being able to understand that, being able to, like, if you're hyper aroused, being able to find tools, and that's one of the things that I teach in my trauma work, is teaching specific tools that bring us from hypo to the window, or hyper to the window. But thinking about that for yourself and recognizing, like, okay, I'm out of the window of tolerance. And what we can do when we're learning to, if we're practicing cultural humility, if we're resourcing ourselves, so every time we feel a little bit of discomfort, we're able to resource ourselves a little bit more, our window of tolerance expands. Our window of tolerance will expand. And that's what we want to do in our lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives. We don't want to have this really small window of tolerance where we're easily knocked in either direction, but we want to have like a nice size window of tolerance that we're able to have a lot of space for learning, a lot of space to be curious, emotionally self-regulate. Curiosity is one of the I find in my life, personally, professionally, all of the different areas of my life, curiosity is one of the most helpful things. When I hear someone say something that I want to shut down, that I'm really reactive about, I stop and breathe, and I'm like, let me get curious about that, instead of wanting to slam that person down for saying something, even if it's offensive to me. I might be like, well, I'm so curious. It was loud. Hello?
It's just from my.
Oh, it's her microphone. Okay.
Oh, okay. So I might not be able to get into it.
Are you having a problem? Is it MJ? Okay. Sounds like the dog is.
If it locks on me, Dave, and you're having that thing, I'll just have him take me to school, because God forbid you actually can't get a key that actually works.
All right. So I think there's a dog situation going on with her. Okay. Yeah, so the window of tolerance. Oops, what happened? What's that?
It might be because I put technologies.
Yep. Yeah, curiosity, that's what we're talking about. So deep listening. So when you're listening to someone, being able to listen to someone, how many of you listen to someone and you already have things happening in your mind that you want to say? It's really, really common, right? It's really, really common. So finding ways to listen to someone and not think about what you're going to say back to them, but listen, like, what are the words that they're saying? What are their body language? This is going to be important for you in your professional life, but in your personal life as well. You know, that deep listening where we're not there with an agenda, but we really want to be able to take in what that person is saying, to be able to tell them back what they said. You know, like, oh, let me reflect back to you what you just said. Did you say, I heard this word? And welcoming discomfort, especially, you know, like I shared about the thing with language, you know, like I'm used to being a person that can walk in and having English be the language, and someone else who doesn't speak English can worry about getting the translation, you know, and that's like, oh, you know, that was sort of like a Godsmack moment for me. I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm so used to having my comfort centered as an English speaking person. Is it necessary for that to happen all the time? No. It's not, and that was a big edge of growth for me. Curiosity over certainty. That's really, really, really important. Having that curiosity, and you know, releasing an agenda, which is really helpful. I know I worked in the Cambria County Prison from 2014 to 2019. I would go in and teach trauma-sensitive yoga and beginnings. Are you familiar with beginnings? They do early intervention. They would do family systems with. We would work with people that were already sentenced and were due to be released, and we would sort of be like a bridge between their time before they came back out, and we could help them form healthy connections and things like that. And so we were in there, and it was one of those things, like I recognized going in there, everybody was dysregulated. The corrections officers, the people that were incarcerated, the counselors, like everyone was dysregulated. And I also recognized that our presence there was disruptive to the order of things. That wasn't our intention, but I recognized that. So I didn't take it personally when corrections officers would be like short or be not real happy to see me. I would be like, oh, you know, I don't know that person. I'm not going to take that personally. And one of the officers that I always dealt with, she was always very professional. Like we weren't chummy, you know. But we would go in there and do our thing and come out. And she ended up contacting me and asking if she could come to one of my regular yoga classes. And she did. Her and her partner, who was also a corrections officer, they came to one of my classes, and she shared with me after the class, she said, you know, the way that you all conduct yourselves in that facility changed the way I look at this whole system. You know, you being able to treat people as human beings and having boundaries, and you know, the way that you didn't react, you weren't reactive to some of the staff. She's like, I've seen how some of our staff treats you, and you respond with respect, and you don't let it rattle you. And she's like, that has changed so much for me. And I was just like, because our intention to go in there was to reduce recidivism. It wasn't to like change the corrections officers, but it was one of those things where it's like, you know, we never know when we can, if we're finding ways to resource ourselves. You know, if you're working if you're here because you're going to work in the criminal justice system, or if you're going to work in social work, you're going to be in really dysregulated environments. You're going to be in really dysregulated environments where people are suffering. And so being able to resource yourself and not mirror that back in those environments is really, really important. And you'll be able to do your work with integrity, with ethics, and you'll be able to do that without getting burned out and either become like cynical or think you need to be like a superhero. So curiosity over certainty, befriend your central nervous system, get to know your nervous system response, get to recognize how to reorient yourself. I do a lot of work in healthcare and nurses. I'm like, oh my God, nurses, they like come into the field with so much passion, and then they're all like, you know, drinking Red Bulls and like, it's like, oh my God, what happened? You know, getting to know your nervous system. And this is, you'll get a copy of this. This is just a little tidbit of how to recognize that. Is the response I'm having right now appropriate or helpful for this moment? I know for myself, sometimes, have any of you found yourself like in a situation where like we're in a really long line in the grocery store, you're in traffic and you're like, oh my gosh, anybody? You get like over, you know, like, oh my God, like, you know, it's not appropriate to have that sort of overreaction. So, you know, notice, is that response I'm having right now appropriate or helpful for this moment? How activated is my stress response? What level? If not, what can I do to modulate it? So that's just something that to bring that awareness when we're talking about culture of humility, we're talking about beliefs, we're talking about being in spaces that are dysregulated, noticing, and that doesn't mean you're like chill all the time. It just means you know how to bring yourself back into that window of tolerance. And this is how we can tell. The language of our body is sensation. When you can feel spacious, not spacey, spacious, grounded, settled, open, connected, expansive, and present, that's when your nervous system, that's when you're in that window of tolerance. That's when you're able to learn and grow. If you feel pressure in your body, your heart rate's elevated, you feel constriction, if there's like a sense of urgency, you feel like limited, like you can't think about complexity and you're reactive, that's normal, but you want to get back to the place above. And then disconnect, shut down, numbness, apathy. How many of you experienced the bottom two pretty often during the last 3-4 years? Right. So there's a normal responses of the central nervous system. There's nothing wrong with us when we experience those. That's just your nervous system saying you are overwhelmed. You are overwhelmed. So there's nothing, you know, there can lead to systemic issues and problems if we're here a lot. We have to bring ourselves into that other state, noticing without judgment. And our bodies are wired to over-respond. We're wired to survive. So we're wired to see the snake in the road rather than the stick, right? We're wired to see something as a threat rather than just something benign. We're overwired that way. So it's just something to understand about ourselves. And taking ownership of restoring, rebuilding, and nourishing and caring for ourselves. This is really, really, really important. And that doesn't mean sitting in front of the TV or on your phone. It means doing things that nourish and feed you. And when we talk about soma, that's that's a Greek word for body. And when you think about your own body, think about this is something that a lot of the work I do, we talk about a lot. Collective somas. When you're in a space with other people, you have like the body of your family where people tend to act a certain way. You have patterns of behavior. And notice notice where, like if you're in the soma of, we have this the soma of Johnstown, you know, that's I think is very dysregulated, you know. There's certain places that you might go and you feel ease in your body. There's certain places and people that you might feel ease in your body around. There's certain places and situations that you go in that you might not feel that ease in your body. That's so when we talk about somas, you might have an experience. And did you ever go to a concert and just have like a really bonding experience with the whole audience, even though like you didn't know all of the people there? Anybody ever had that experience? Or you've gone to like a concert or even a sports, like a football game or some sort of event where you've like felt like the energy of the crowd and you felt part of that. So that's what we talk about. We have these collective experiences, these collective somas. There are ways our body responds and interacts in those. And so just getting that feeling, like when you walk in spaces, what that feels like. And for me, this is my foundation. Knowing what your foundation is, that can be different for everybody. I'm not telling you your foundation has to be mine, but mine, being from my foundation is comes from this place of equity, wanting all beings to have equal access to resources to thrive. to being able to freely and safely navigate in your bodies as you show up in your body and live in peace. And may all of our thoughts, words, and actions contribute to that. We're all connected. And so lastly, I just wanted, before, if we have any other questions or comments, I just wanted to share some really great resources with you that hopefully can help you on your journey of learning more about beliefs, about the psychology of beliefs, about mindfulness. I mentioned Nikki Meyer's Yoga for 12-Step Recovery. She's a lot of really great resources. Generative somatics is rooted in anti-oppression. And it's sort of what I'm talking about, like being in our bodies and being able to feel where we feel liberated and where we feel constrained. There's a lot of great resources from generative somatics, APA, American Psychological Association, Harris Connections, I work for them. They have some really great resources. Hopefully, I know Professor Madison has been wanting to for years get something like that here at Penn Highlands for faculty and staff. Maybe that can happen. And Resma Menachem, have anybody heard of him? He wrote In My Grandmother's Hands. It's a really wonderful book. He's an African-American man, and he's writing a lot about particularly police violence against people of color. And he writes about regulation. The whole book that he wrote, My Grandmother's Hands, is about regulation. He has a really active Instagram feed. He does a lot, like a daily live, but he's talking about regulation. He's talking about just the dysregulation of white people, of police, of just the whole, how people are responding in a really dysregulated state. And his whole thing is anti-racism can't just be a theory, it has to be embodied. We have to feel that in our bodies. We have to be able to be in our bodies and find that connection with one another, not alienation. So anti-racism and critical race theory, they're not intellectual things. They're things we actually live, we embody anti-oppression in how we live in our bodies and how we allow other people to live in their bodies. And then Rhonda McGee, she's wonderful. She's in the Bay Area. She's a lawyer, and she does a lot of mindfulness around race and difference. And she has a lot of great material on her website. She also has a lot of presentations and things that are recorded that are available. So those are just some resources that I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your time. And open up for any questions or comments or anything anyone wants to say. I guess, oh, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. See the people's faces. So was this material familiar to you or new? What's that? Go ahead. You.
New.
New? Okay.
I mean, somewhat. I mean, you hear it in the media, but other than that,
Like what did you hear in the media that was reminded you of this?
a lot of like the movements and stuff.
When you say movement, do you mean like social movement?
Like Roe v. Wade, stuff like that.
Okay, okay. Right. Yeah, so being able to think about, things like that are happening, and not just have them be something outside, but something that's in our bodies. Like, what does it feel like to talk about Roe v. Wade in your body? What does it feel like to share about what you think about that without shutting someone else down? Anyone else? Yeah.
I feel like going back to mindfulness, that's something I definitely try to practice in my life. And I feel like it's for me personally, at least, it's about feeling connected not only to your body, but realizing that everyone is connected in some way.
Right.
So a lot of the adversity and problems that happen, I feel like you should go into it with an open mind, thinking that it's a misunderstanding. It's not, it might come across as different emotions like anger and hatred. But those are the kind of people that I feel like you can always maybe try to teach them something that they didn't know about themselves, and like find that connection. And I think that's where growth usually happens.
Okay. Can you give me an example of that?
Well, so I've been a waitress for 10 years. I have 2 kids, and just a few weeks ago, actually, one of my customers called me a moron, which is normal in the service industry. But I mean, there's been times in the past where I've gotten super angry about things like that. But I just didn't say anything, and I just turned and was gonna walk away, and he said, "Did that make you angry?" And I said, "No, it didn't make me angry." I said, "I just, you don't really know who I am, so I don't think that's a very nice thing to say to somebody that you don't know me, you don't know my circumstances." And I said, "I won't explain my circumstances to you, but I don't feel like I'm a moron, so I'm not offended." But
And how did he respond to that?
he did not say anything for the rest of the time, and it's a little uncomfortable because he's a regular, so he sees me all the time. But now when he sees me, he's very respectful and he's nice and he asks how I'm doing. But I mean, that's just a very small example. But
Sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
That was powerful because, you see the shift in, ownership, and who is taking the power of, or being responsible for my reaction, my response, that whole idea of mindfulness and knowing that there may be some uncomfortable moments in change, but the change is necessary.
Right.
And the change, in your example would be one of like not reacting.
Right.
But hey, those are your thoughts and you're allowed to have them, but I don't need to react to it or respond to it. And that's powerful right there.
Yeah, you didn't allow him to take your power,
Mhm.
which is powerful. And then sharing that in a story is so impactful. Like hearing how you did that was really impactful. Like I felt very like, wow, when you were telling, how you responded to him. I felt like very, I felt that power that you had, that you kept. So thank you.
I appreciate your story too, and I want to say that my first thought was, if that person became uncomfortable, then they just open themselves up to cultural humility dealing with people in the service industry.
Right.
And not just you, but everywhere they go now, and they think, and it opens up that box, if you will, to a different kind of thing.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I also used to work in the service industry. I used to be phone representative for a accounting company. Dealt with a lot of angry people. Most of the concepts you explained were stuff that I kind of already sort of knew, but I just didn't really put any words to it. Like it's one of those things that it just kind of like, it's not news to me, but this is the first time I've heard it described this way. I would have probably described it differently, but to each their own. If anything, the way you described it probably might have helped different people learn if I were to explain it. I also had a background being that kid everybody made fun of in school because I used to talk to the teachers more than the other kids, but that was just sort of that was sort of my natural response to the fact that I didn't get along with the other kids, and that perpetuated the process, But that's just, I'm used to having a gaggle of people whispering about me, like whenever I say something, because that's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm paranoid, maybe I'm not. But when I worked customer service, I've dealt with a lot of angry people, and I like to think that at least some of them, I might have been able to at least inspire a small fragment of, there are people on the other end. I'm not just a robot, although some people have, cursed me out, et cetera, et cetera. But I like to think there are at least a couple people I impressed. Had a couple people offer me some beers. I wasn't 21 at the time.
Nice.
I wish I could have taken them up on that, but I couldn't.
So what I'm hearing you say when you worked that job, were you dealing with complaints?
I actually did technical support, but it frequently devolved into people complaining about the program. Because I'll be honest, I say this as somebody who was tech support for the program. It was a complete garbage program, and I'm surprised it worked at all. Whoever programmed it was a complete and utter hack. So I understand the customer's complaints. So maybe I was a little bit more empathetic because I knew that what I was working on was a piece of work.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? What are you taking with you? What are you taking with you? Yeah.
Be more open-minded to other people's experiences and how they feel.
Yeah. Yeah. How many of you have ever said something and someone said, oh, it wasn't that bad? Right. How many of you have had somebody even tell you, don't feel that way, you shouldn't feel that way, right? So when we deny someone else their experience, it really, it shuts everything down. There's no room for curiosity. And I think a lot of times, some of those things are what's behind those things are the patterns of discrimination and segregation and patterns of domination and oppression. And it's like, it's so painful that we want to minimize and deny them, but it's not helpful. It's not helpful to anybody. Anybody else? You had your hand. Did you put your hand raised?
You already said what's going to say.
Go ahead. I want to hear you say it.
I was going to say a new perspective.
I'm sorry.
A new perspective.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I just like how you like brought the topics up that like no one likes to talk about and like things that we wouldn't have in like a classroom setting. So like these are things that everyone knows about, but we don't shed light on it, or we act like, oh, we're past that, oh, we're beyond that, and we don't change our minds.
Right. And that is so, we have to learn to talk about our humanity. We have to, without shutting down. We can talk about the weather, who cares? I mean, I care about the weather, but you know, we have to learn to talk about our humanity and not let the differences shut us down and not bypass, because I think what happens, especially with people in dominant culture, is we want to just bypass and say, oh, we're all one. And it's like we are, but not all of us have the same experience in navigating. Not all of us feel free and safe in our bodies navigating through life. So it's can we hold on to that connection, but recognize the different experiences people have, and learn from that and grow. Yeah, we have to learn. We have to learn to talk about our humanity and have conversations. And one of the things that I think is really important, especially in the anti-oppression work, have conversations that don't need resolution. Have conversations so you can learn and grow. You're not going to solve everything with one conversation. We're not going to like, and the idea is not to preach and tell people what to think and feel, but is to be really rooted in your own body and your own experience, and recognize that someone else has an experience that might be different from yours. Anybody else?
Yeah, personally, like I really liked how you were speaking about like just trying to push past discomfort whenever it arises. Like, and I like to think that not just like within conversations with people, but even like when you were saying about the soma and collective soma, like there's some times where you go into a place and like the entirety of the group, you're just kind of like, this makes me feel uncomfortable. And it's just like, you know, trying to find ways to move past it and understand it a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and there might be places where we need to be aware that our safety could be compromised. And so having that awareness is important. And one of the things, my son is 26, and you know, he's a big white guy. And one of the things that I said to him when he was growing up and he was interested in girls, I was like, you can, you know, it's great to be interested in someone and appreciate them, but I want them to feel safe when you're with them. Like, you know, how you look at someone could change how they feel. You can look at them and have an appreciation for them, and they can feel like, oh, that feels really lovely. Or you could look at them and objectify them, and they can feel unsafe. And so be clear, or else I'll wash your mouth out with soap. You know you're bigger than me, I will take you down, and if you're disrespectful, I will do it. She knows, our boys grew up together. but you know, like I wanted to teach my son that, because I'm like, it's important that you recognize someone might feel unsafe because you're there, or safe. You know, make it be the safe, you know, experience. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone that hasn't said anything? Yeah.
I guess something I could add. I heard, I remember a quote from when I was younger that said, mistakes make us human, but forgiveness makes us humanity. And the way I take that is dealing with like this, like right here, is that we as a collective soma over time have made like a lot of mistakes. But for us to try to just like act like they never happened takes away from our humanity and our community. So we have to learn about these things and learn to forgive them and to grow as a collective soma.
Right. Yeah, that is really, thank you for saying that. And it makes me really feel positive that you are young people and you are showing up and you have the desire to not whitewash everything and to sit with the hard stuff and move into something that is a better version of who you can be. It's really, it's possible, but we have to, like you said, we have to do that as a collective. We have to do that individually and as a collective too. So, anybody from the Zoom group? Brayden, I can see you laughing. Are you laughing at us?
No, I just feel like, I know you talked about like curiosity and boundaries, and I don't know, I feel like a lot of us don't, like, we talk about being uncomfortable asking questions, or some of us are, or like you get in a situation where you want to ask a question, you end up asking a question, and it might been a sensitive topic, and then they end up getting offended, and then now you just kind of shut your curiosity off, and then you don't revisit that again because you think that you've offended somebody. And
Can I offer something to that scenario?
I have so many questions and I can't get my thoughts together. Like, I feel like people can ask me anything and I'll be like, oh yeah. And I try not to be like, oh, why would you ask me that? That's just like, you know, shouldn't be something that you should be asking me. And I don't know.
Right. I mean, I can offer something from the perspective of someone who wants to ask a question. And maybe that asking could also be part of a response if you're not resourced. And that's one of the things that I've learned, especially if I'm wanting to ask someone that might not have the same positionality as me in society. I might say, hey, I'd like to have can we talk about this? Are you resourced to have this conversation? If you're not, and happenings around George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd, you know, wanting to be there for a lot of my friends of color, a lot of my friends, Black women, but not wanting to traumatize them, re-traumatize somebody in that situation. And so being able to say to someone, are you resourced to have a conversation? If you are, I'm here. If you're not, just let me know what I can do to support you. I mean, you know, we don't have to like open up wounds with every conversation, have every conversation be uncomfortable. How do we show support and solidarity to one another? We recognize that we might be having different experiences around things that happen, and, you know, find ways to respectfully check in. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, yeah.
When you talked about people like shutting down their curiosity, that actually reminded me of there is a certain somebody who shall go unnamed in my family who has a very, very strict interpretation of the Bible. And if you say anything that goes literally against that interpretation, even if it's perfectly reasonable, they will shut it down and they will say, that's not how I read it. Or if you even try to imply at all that there could be supplementary documents in the Bible, they will go, the Bible is God-breathed, and it's like, and they'll say like, oh, it's absolute. It's not supposed to be edited or changed. And to which I respond with, what do you think the Catholic Church did for the entire first 6 centuries of the AD times? You know.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, trying to be humble means we don't necessarily like show up and need to have the agenda of changing. Hey, so yeah, I mean, hopefully you can take some things with you. And I think you're all going to get the PowerPoint. If you have anything you'd ever want to email me about, or if there's something you had a question about that you were like, oh, I didn't want to raise my hand in the class or whatever. I'm grateful for you here. Thank you for the dialogue. Thank you for the back and forth. I hope there's things that you take with you and they inform your personal life, your life as a student and beyond that. Thank you for having me here. So.
Thank you guys. I thank everybody for showing up and your participation in this presentation, because I think it was very helpful just to kind of get the dialogue started, you know, for us to think about what we're thinking about when it comes down to looking at just the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So hopefully, you know, we'll be able to continue the conversations in other classes, but definitely keep thinking about what you're thinking about and don't be afraid to just kind of exhale through life. So my intro to social work students, if y'all could just stay put for, of course, a little while longer, we're going to continue on. And for everyone else, I bid you love, peace, and bacon.
Make sure for me, you sign in. If you're on Zoom, send me a quick email that you are here. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next Monday.